The festive season is almost here and many employers are looking for temporary staff members. Are potential employees well informed about labor laws that need to be considered before they can be hired on a temporary basis? Let's speak about this with labor lawyer advocate Tertius Wessels, who's the legal director at Strategy Labor Solutions and joins us via our video link this morning. Advocate Wessels, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time. And yeah, it's that time of the season, isn't it, where there are people who thankfully can rely on temporary jobs to respond to typically an increase in demand over the festive season. But what are some of the laws governing this that people should think about?
Good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to your viewers. Thanks again for the opportunity. I think one of the important things that especially employers need to be aware of is that since 2015, the Labour Relations Amendment Act brought into effect certain important provisions that regulates and governs the temporary employment space in South Africa. One of the critical things for employers to know and understand is that there has to be a written contract of employment entered into before a person starts commencing employment. And secondly, that there has to be a legitimate and justifiable reason for appointing that person in the first place on a temporary basis. Now, the Act outlines various reasons. So, for example, where there's a temporary increase in work volume or where the person is being employed to perform seasonal work, which is often something that we see in the retail space and in the hospitality space with the festive season that's now approaching. What many employers don't understand is that whilst employees are temporary employees, that doesn't mean that they're not entitled to the same kind of benefits that other employees would be entitled to. So, for example, temporary employees also accrue annual leave. They're also entitled to sick leave, etc. But the manner in which those kind of things get regulated is a little bit different to that of permanent employees. So it's important that both employers and employees looking to make use of this festive season to gain employment familiarize themselves with what their rights and obligations are.
Yeah, and you know, typically the type of person to look out for this kind of opportunity would have been desperate for much of the year, given our unemployment crisis in this country, which also means they're vulnerable employers or employees, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, that's one of the unfortunate realities that we face in South Africa, is that many employers see this as an opportunity to kind of misuse or abuse employees that are desperate job seekers. But it doesn't take away the fact that no matter how desperate somebody is or how willing somebody might be to work for terms and conditions that are less favorable, that the law is there to protect them ultimately. And employers can find themselves in hot water with fines or the Department of Labour coming to do inspections and issuing non-compliance orders against them if they try and sidestep the provisions of the legislation.
Yeah, speaking about certain employers taking advantage, what also sometimes happens is that people are employed on a temporary working basis and it's extended indefinitely, if you know what I mean, under these temporary conditions. That too surely is against the law.
Yeah, 100%. So what the legislation or the amendments to the legislation seek to do is kind of ensure that there is not that misuse and abuse at the end of the day. There has to be a legitimate, justifiable reason why you're not appointing somebody on a permanent basis. And that reasons need to be specified in the contract, because any failure by an employer to either or to keep employees working beyond the fixed-term contract, or where they create a reasonable expectation of continuous renewal and they later on then fail to renew a contract, could find themselves facing disputes at the CCMA for unfair dismissal claims.
So what's a reasonable amount of time for someone to be considered as a legitimate temporary worker before they need to start asking questions about why they're not being taken on a more permanent basis?
Yeah, that would very much depend. We see, for example, that some organizations offer their permanent employees 6 months maternity leave. So in circumstances like that, an employer can appoint somebody else as a temporary employee for the duration that that employee is on maternity leave. Other organizations only employ employees to work on specified projects that are of a limited duration. Now, whether or not that project is going to be finished within a week, 6 months, or a year, that very much depends. But the key element here is that there is a justifiable reason for affixing this period of employment. Obviously, the longer the contract lasts, employees do acquire certain other benefits. For example, Section 198B of the LRA makes a provision that where an employee has been employed on a fixed-term contract exceeding 2 years, that even in those circumstances, an employee could qualify for severance payments.
Wow. Earlier you spoke about, there being inspections that could be taken by the department to ensure that employers essentially are abiding by the law. I wonder how well we do at that, though, given just how many employers there could be versus inspectors, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, it often takes, for example, the EFF to bombard one particular restaurant, and then we see these blitz inspections being done by the Department of Employment and Labour. And it is a known reality that we do struggle with the amount of inspectors that we have versus the number of employers. But it does not mean that your day won't come. And when it does, it's important that you do ensure that you have the necessary things in place to ensure compliance, because non-compliance orders can become a very costly thing for especially smaller employers.